Hello, welcome back to the Buchla Easel tutorial series. Today we're finishing off our look at the primary original interface with the keyboard section. Now, even though I call it the keyboard section and so does the manual also makes a point of describing this section as a voltage processor. That's a really good way to think about it. Yes, it takes a lot of its steer from the keyboard, and we'll see it is intrinsically tied to the keyboard. But if you think about it in terms of control voltages, it makes your life a lot easier. So from left to right, let's have a look at this pulse gate. What's this doing? Well, this is tied to the keyboard. Every time we hit a key on the keyboard or hold a key open, it's going to generate a control voltage. But the weird thing about this gate is that it's not the same sized gate as other controls in the system. Now, a way for me to demonstrate this is to plug the envelope generator into the oscillator. Okay, now if I also take an output from the envelope generator and patch it into the oscillator and give it an amount of modulation, we've seen at 110 basically adding an octave onto the pitch, so we're going to be there or thereabouts an octave higher. I'm a bit flat. There we go, close enough. If I take that away again, so we're back down to our regular C3. If I now take an output from this pulse gate instead, let's see what happens. It's halfway there. So a flat G flat 3 is kind of halfway towards the next octave. So the control voltage that this gate outputs is half of what you would get from the envelope generator or the pulsar or polypressure or any of the other gates that can be kind of fully opened. It seems that the pulse gate is half as strong. I don't know why. It seems a bit weird to me. Next, we've got clock rate, and we dealt with this a lot in other modules. The only thing remaining to say really as a wrap up is that this is a way that you can enable multiple modules to sync together. So if your pulsar and your envelope generator both want a common source of timing, then that's a convenient means by which you can do it from the clock gate. But other than that, it's the Easel's fundamental timing mechanism. Next, we've got Portamento. So this is the speed at which one note slides into the next. As we stand at the moment, each note is distinct and clear. If we start introducing Portamento, we get the classic kind of Moog analog synth sound. And between 1 and 2, I think, is the sweet spot. At longer lengths, it gets really crazy. It takes ages, and it's a logarithmic effect. As it approaches its final resting place, you'll see the descent or ascent get slower and slower and slower, like a plane coming into land. And if I take it up here, it jumps quite quickly most of the way, and then takes its sweet time over the last couple of semitones. You can also apply a modulation to the length of Portamento, basically the speed of this slide. So let's take one off the pulsar, for instance. So now the pulsar is doing its thing in the background, and depending on how much control voltage it's outputting, whether or not the light is fully lit or getting dimmer and dimmer and dimmer, it's going to have that much of a modulation effect on the Portamento speed. So you get a randomization of the slope of the scale of the slide between the notes. Now, anybody from the UK will be thinking clangers at this point. Thank you, phone. That's Portamento. Then we have a little arpeggiator. So the difference between an arpeggiator and a sequencer is that a sequencer, you specifically dial frequencies in or control voltages in. With the arpeggiator, it's all about pressing multiple notes on the keyboard, and then it plays each one of those sequentially rather than, it's a mono synthesizer, so if I press 3 notes at the moment, you're only ever going to hear one of them. Now, if I hold those 3 notes down, you can see I'm playing a C major. If I turn the sequencer into ascending mode, it starts playing those three notes in ascending mode. Let's bring a fourth note in and slow it down a bit. The arpeggiator has its own clock. It's not tied to the system clock. Let's make them random. Now, it's okay to call it random, and there's a reasonably accurate label, but just note that it's playing the same thing every time. So once it's picked its quotes random sequence, it does play that over and over again. It doesn't reset every time you play those notes. And if I take my fingers off the keys and play the 4 notes again, it settles down into the same random pattern. So I don't know what the algorithm is, but there is one there. It's consistent in its randomness. We have an input jack into the arpeggiator, and this controls the speed or the rate of arpeggiation, not the control voltages of the output notes. So if I send the modulation oscillator into LFO mode and take an output from it. Now the base arpeggiation rate clock speed that you've got down here will be the basically your starting point. How slow do you want it to get when the LFO is at its slowest? So I'll turn that right down and press those 4 notes again. It's easier to hear in ascending mode what it's doing actually. There we go. The wave gets slower and slower and slower, and then the triangle, this is a triangular LFO, gets faster and faster and faster again. It's probably worth mentioning you need to keep your eye on this switch. If you're messing around with the arpeggiator and later on you want to go back to just using the keyboard as a regular keyboard. See, I'm pressing all these notes on the keyboard and I'm not hearing any sound. It's because it's still in arpeggiator mode, and I actually happen to have a really slow clock here. So if I press a key and then take my finger off the key, I'm not actually holding the key down long enough for it to register a single note in the arpeggiator. I'll just hold that chord down for a while. And there's the arpeggiator in the background. So just beware that this switch is here. As soon as you want to start using the easel as a keyboard again, make sure you turn it back to none. And then we've got our keyboard back. Next, we've got this preset voltage source, and I'm going to deal with this whole section in one go. What we've got here are 4 dials, 4 controls that can be set to fixed static values, and they have a modulation effect, an additive modulation effect, to 2 different things. The first thing is the pitch of any keyboard-based oscillator. So these are intrinsically tied to the keyboard. Bear in mind, this is called the keyboard section. So without us having to wire anything together, no jump leads required. If we set this toggle switch to preset mode, it means these knobs are now engaged. And only one of them is ever active at a time, and the active dial is determined by these white switches underneath. So at the moment, dial number 1 is live. So if I get the oscillator to generate some sound and then turn this dial, you'll hear the pitch go up. It's got nothing to do with any of the sliders on the oscillator. This is an additive modulation source. None of the other dials are currently doing anything because only voltage source number 1, voltage processor number 1 is active. You hear each of the different dials come in when I press the corresponding button. So that's what's going on in preset mode. Now, in addition to doing that, you see this arrow pointing into the arpeggiator? these voltage sources, these additive control voltages, are also applying to the arpeggiator. So let's get the arpeggiator running again. And now I'll start increasing the voltage source. So because the arpeggiator is using the oscillators, you know, we're opening an envelope here. On gate 1, complex oscillator is generating tone. These voltage sources can be used to modulate the sounds of each of those notes. So try not to get too confused about what the arpeggiator's doing. It's really taking any keys that you've got pressed on the keyboard and playing them one at a time, but it is genuinely playing those keys in every significant respect. So anything that you've got rooted to the modulation of those pitches, and the preset voltage sources are such a thing, they're going to apply to the arpeggiator as well. But this means I can get my arpeggiator going, and each time I press one of these, it's going to add this much control voltage to the pitch of that arpeggio. Now in octaves mode, it disengages the knobs and they're not doing anything anymore, and we go to a fixed 1 octave per button configuration. So I'll start playing my C chord again, go up an octave, another octave, and another octave. So these are basically just like preset features where you're essentially turning these knobs to the point where they're increasing the pitch of the oscillator by that amount. So that's like mode 1 of the voltage source, using the dials and the pre-wiring stuff behind the scenes. I'm going to turn that off so it's not having any effect anymore. This output jack, however, this is permanently live, and it doesn't matter what you do with this toggle switch. If I take an output from this instead, now, oh sorry, I need to give it some modulation obviously. So with the gate fully open, doing as much as it can, it's having the maximum modulation effect according to this slider. This is, remember me talking about how much am I going to let you through. If I send that slider all the way to the top, we start off at C again, but now the range of modulation of this knob is going to be much more extreme. So that's the whole interface covered of the original instrument. We've done everything. In the next video, we'll open the advanced page and we'll start having a look at some of the stuff that Arturia have added to the original synthesizer to kind of enhance its functionality. Thanks very much for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing, hit notifications. You'll be sure not to miss the next one. Hope to see you then.